Welcome to the Legacy Radio Network. This is the Everything Financial Radio Show. I'm your host, Dennis Tubbergen, and I'm awfully glad you tuned in today. Shortly, we're going to be joined by Mr. Jim Babka of the organization DownsizeDC.org, and we're going to consider with Jim, how do we fire Congress? Anybody think that's a good idea? We're actually not going to talk about firing Congress, but we're going to talk about denying consent, an interesting concept being put forth by Mr. Babka's organization. Also on today's show, fresh troubles for Europe. There was a summit this past week, and there's not a good solution for those contributing or those receiving the European bailouts. We'll talk about that. Also, Europe, many countries in Europe are now in a recession. Greece is in a full-fledged deflationary depression. The outlook for France and Germany does not look good. What will this mean for stock and bond markets? We'll talk about that. Also on today's program, is China accumulating gold but not admitting it? Are they positioning their currency, the renminbi, to be the logical choice for the next world reserve currency, replacing the U.S. dollar at some point in the near future? And if that happens, what will it mean for you and your lifestyle? And finally on today's program, Hostess, the company that bakes Wonder Bread and Twinkies, is going away. I'm sure you've heard the story, but we're going to give you a different perspective today. Why didn't the union believe the company's threats? We'll explore that, and we'll talk about how this is a symptom of a much bigger issue, and that is excessive debt levels that need to be purged from the system during an economic winter season. Also, I'd like to remind you, if you've not requested our 2012 guide, Surviving a Market Crash, we would be glad to send you a copy of it. In this full guide, you see all our research, all the data from which we have reached these conclusions, and we'd love to send it to you to look at as a second opinion. Again, go to investingapproach.com, enter your name and address, and we'll be glad to send it to you. Also, if you would like to attend one of our discovery groups, you have one more chance this year. You can come and see us at Sunnyvale Country Club on December the 8th. If you're 65 or older, we have a special session for you in which we outline Social Security changes for next year, as well as tax on Social Security. That will begin at 4:30 p.m. and conclude at 6 p.m. If you're under 65, we've got a session for you as well, starting at 7 p.m. and concluding at 8:30 p.m. And we'll be talking about the economic winter season, and we'll be talking about strategies that you might want to consider to protect your nest egg. So go to personallegacyseminars.com to get more information about those discovery groups. You can click on the link to register as long as space remains as well. Also, a quick reminder, you can find Everything Financial Radio now on iTunes. You can download any of the shows or segments from shows if you want to hear an interview to your iPad or iPod. Again, we are on iTunes. Just go to the iTunes store and search on Everything Financial Radio. You could also go to everythingfinancialradio.com to listen to any of the archive shows. I'm pleased to have back on the Everything Financial Radio show Mr. Jim Babka. Jim is president of an organization called DownsizeDC. He is a frequent guest here on the program. And, Jim, we're very glad you decided to come back.
Dennis, nice to be with you again.
Jim, for any new listeners who maybe missed or maybe a listener that missed your prior appearance here on the program, tell us about DownsizeDC.org.
Well, for most of the last several years, we've been known for our Educate the Powerful system, where people can come in and they can give their so-called representatives in Washington their work orders for the day. We've provided content, let people know in kind of an easy, quick way what it is that Congress is up to, usually provided a sample letter, and we provided a system that allowed them to deliver a message in such a personalized fashion that that office knew that they were hearing from a constituent. And along the way, we've developed legislation to begin to try to bring the legislative process under control. The Read the Bills Act, the Write the Laws Act, and the One Subject at a Time Act are all designed to reduce the power and the scope that the government has to just kind of willy-nilly run over us by getting control of the rules by which Congress imposes rules on us.
So, Jim, in light of the fact that Washington is now, I read a news article this past week that I believe there is a website that's set up to let the public provide feedback on new proposed regulations. And I believe the article stated there were 65 new regulations per day that were being proposed. Do you ever feel like you're losing ground and this is a futile battle?
Well, it's interesting. It's an interesting question. I think most people do feel that way. To me, this is pushing us one day closer to when we get rid of all of this. I think that increasingly people are resisting. They're standing up. They're not complying. They're finding ways to withdraw their consent. And that's what it comes down to. Thomas Jefferson said in the Declaration of Independence that all government rests upon the consent of the governed. You and I enter into governing relationships all the time, whether they be in churches or clubs or charities, whether it's with our employer or if we are the guy that owns the business, we are accountable to all of our customers. Contracts of various kinds. We're accountable in a number of different ways, but we can always, enter and exit those relationships. We can devise ways to move on with our life, not always painlessly, but we can. But there's no escape from what the state is doing, and increasingly more and more people are recognizing that we're all kind of in the same bad boat and we want out. And I think what you're seeing is from the state, from the people of the political class, is they keep trying to express how relevant they are. They really are relevant, and they want you to know how relevant they are. And they keep coming up with more and more rules and more regulations that are building more and more resistance in place. And I think increasingly they're demonstrating their irrelevance and even that they're not really serving us anymore so much as they're serving themselves. And I think that, so I think maybe this process is almost necessary if we're going to get to the other side. I don't think this is losing. I think this is the death rattle of the state.
That's an interesting perspective, Jim. And, I guess I'd like your feedback because given what happened in the last election, President Obama was reelected. The makeup or composition of both the House and Senate did not change dramatically. Even though I sense that there's this frustration out there, it seems that people went and voted for the status quo. How do you reconcile that in your mind?
Well, I don't think we should blame the people here, Dennis. I think that's unfair. Number one, the system's rigged in just so many different ways. Let's talk about selecting your congressman. He selects you, not the other way around, through a process called the gerrymander. Let's talk about incumbency. That's protected by campaign finance law. Let's talk about the fact that third parties aren't relevant. Well, that's protected by ballot access laws and a phony debate commission. And you take all of these things together, and you create a system where it delivers two candidates that are virtually identical. They're not identical. There are some distinctions and differences, but they're fairly minute. And I think if you actually talk to the American people and try to find out where they stand, you would find that on social and civil liberties issues, they tend to be more tolerant, more even, let's say, liberal. And I think if you talk to them on economic issues, you find that they are more responsible, or shall we say maybe even conservative on fiscal issues. They want lower taxes, less regulation, balanced budgets. So, you kind of have a picture that many people call libertarian. But to my libertarian friends, I say, well, there's a third aspect to this whole thing, and that is they have a distrust or a fear of cronies, of cronyism, which is a lot of what this is what the state is made up of. It's just crony. Some call it crony capitalism or whatever, but this aspect here. And so they favor things like term limits, campaign finance restrictions, and other things from kind of a populist impulse that they have there. Kind of a healthy distrust, not just of government, but maybe even larger corporations and other major institutions, unions or whatnot. And so here we had a candidate on one side that said he was going to do the right thing fiscally. And a lot of people who are more conservative agreed with it. His name was Mitt Romney. I don't believe he would have followed through, but he said he would. That was what he was proposing and offering. And then on the other side, we had a guy who advertised himself as more socially tolerant and maybe appealed a bit to some of those populist instincts. Said he really wanted to do more in those areas. And at the end of the day, there was kind of a bad choice where you kind of maybe got 1.5 of what you wanted, and on the other side, you maybe got 1 of what you wanted. And the difference was so close, it appears that people basically said, hey, Barack Obama's going to give me just a skosh more of what I want than what Mitt Romney's going to do. But I only have these two bad choices, and I'm stuck with picking the lesser of two evil. That's where most of the American people found themselves. I don't think it's legitimate, Dennis, to stop and accept that premise that we pick the lesser of two evil. I think there's a way to think this through to its logical conclusion and say we should reject evil entirely, and I do believe all government rests in the consent of the governed. But in terms of this election, if we're looking at how people voted, I don't think we can conclude a lot from their votes in particular. based on who won.
You know, we've got maybe a couple of minutes left in this segment, and I'd like you just to maybe expand, Jim, and talk about the fact you made a comment that the system's rigged. There's the incumbency is certainly favored and protected by election law. Can you just expand a little bit on that for our listeners that might not be familiar with what it is that you're talking about?
Yeah, let me just pick one area of this. Because I mentioned three before, but let me pick one and kind of hone in on it and just do it in the brief time that we've got, and that is campaign finance law. Campaign finance law says that we're going to limit the size of contributions that can be made so that no individual's one contribution can decide an election. You can't have a mega donor come in and really put a candidate on the map. And then they say also all these donations have to be reported. That means that the guy who's the incumbent, who is likely to be reelected because of a host of reasons, now knows who his enemies are, who it is that he has to punish. And a lot of this operates much like a protection racket. So the incumbent running for office simply puts up his sign saying, I'm going to run again. And all the various things that he regulates, the committees he sits on and so forth, all of the various lobbyists and interests that have interest before him, in order to keep their access, keep the door open, and even keep him favorable, will make contributions. They will gather up all the people that they need, have them write the small checks that they need. They'll put their source code in the corner so that lobby is on record as having raised so much money for the candidate. Now, the challenger, on the other hand, the game is like filling a swimming pool with a teaspoon. It's very, very hard for him to raise all those little tiny donations, and nobody wants to show up on his list because they're afraid he's going to lose. They don't want to be an enemy of the guy that's in office. Now, here's the kicker of this whole thing, Dennis. Money matters far more to the challenger than does the incumbent. The incumbent's already reached his apex. He's going to win. The only way you can beat the incumbent is to get him to begin spending his war chest, and that means you have to begin, as a challenger, accumulating a war chest. The more that the incumbent spends, the more likely he is going down. He's trying to defend his position, hold his position, and you want to pull him down as much as you possibly can, prove to the media that you're relevant and you should be a part of the race. That's what the role of money is. It's much more important than challenger, and it's no surprise that it's the incumbents that end up writing our election laws.
Jim Babka, we're going to continue this conversation in the next segment. Stay with us.